All right, let me share my screen with you. Let's see. Show all windows. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. I want us to get our bearings because it's been close to, I think it's been 2 weeks since we've had an opportunity to learn together. And where we were was talking about the law of Masira, the law of acting as an informant. And we know that the Gemara is very stringent about informing on another Jew to the authorities. And when trying to understand why that is, it became clear that the reason is because in ancient and medieval governments, there was tremendous corruption and a lack of moral behavior. So that if you would inform on a fellow Jew, you would be endangering the life of that Jew, causing him to either be incarcerated, executed, to be stripped of every possession that he had so that his family would die of starvation. And so Masira was a really, really serious issue. Today, if a person is committing a crime and a person informs on that person, so certainly the informant is not chayiv misa, is not liable for the death penalty because he hasn't done anything that rises to the level of endangering the victim's life, right? The only thing that you could say is that perhaps if there was no need for him to act as an informant, he did something unethical by getting another Jew in trouble with the authorities. If the other Jew is creating a nuisance or is stealing from others, then there's a mitzvah to inform upon that Jew and to make sure that his wayward and injurious actions do not spread any further, right? So that's clear. And then the last thing that we saw that we were studying was in a democratic society that is civil and that has a moral government, is it permitted for a person to be an auditor, tax auditor for the CRA or for the IRS? And there we saw that Rav Moshe said it was permitted, but we saw from Rav Vosner that he said it would be better to find another job whenever possible. Okay, so that's where we were up to. The next 3 halachos, the next 3 seifim that we're going to see are a discussion of the Moser, and we're talking about the ancient and medieval Moser, who's chayiv misa because he's trying to, but through his act of Masira, he's getting people into mortal danger. And we said that person is subject to be killed. You have to stop him even if using lethal force is necessary. And and the reason why is because he's called a rodef. He's a pursuer. And the law of a rodef is that if someone tries to kill you, you have a mitzvah to kill them first in order to stop them. But remember that the halacha of rodef also, just the standard halacha of rodef is, if someone's trying to kill you, right, and they are very inept at their ability to kill, and you can stop them from killing you by using non-lethal force. If you use lethal force, you have committed murder because you could have stopped them by in a way that would not kill them. So if a little child is coming at you with a knife, and it's possible to just disarm them very easily, so then you don't have a right, even if they're theoretically or technically a rodef, you don't have a right to stop them with lethal force. Now, this gets to the halacha that we're going to see now, which is that at what point do we say the person is liable for the death penalty, and at what point is he no longer liable for the death penalty? So in Ches, he writes as follows: Asa hamoser asher zamam asur lahargo. That if the moser informed already, and his informing succeeded in getting another Jew either in serious trouble or getting the other Jew killed, what was done, and at this point, to kill the Moser would not serve any constructive purpose. And so therefore, if it's only after the fact, you're not allowed to kill him at that point because he no longer presents a threat as a rodef anymore because his actions are in the past. Ella im kain huchzak b'mesirus gimel pa'amim shezeh yehareg shema yimsor acherim. However, the exception would be if he's already established a pattern 3 times of getting fellow Jews in trouble with the law. In that case,
sorry, did we?
Yeah, go ahead, Izzy.
I don't have my Zion marked up, but we did it. Sorry.
That's okay. Elin kain huchzak b'mesiras gimel pa'anim amim shezeh yehareg shema yimsor acherim. He says, if the person already has established a pattern of having informed on 3 Jews, even though there's no one currently that he's going after, but there's an assumption that he's already created a pattern for himself of being a Moser, and therefore you're allowed to eliminate him in order to prevent him from future Mesira. But if he doesn't have that track record, and he was just a one-off that he went ahead and informed on a fellow Jew, and what's done is done, you don't have a right at this point to go ahead and kill him. And furthermore, even if a person is a Moser, and we've given you a right to kill him to prevent him from doing the damage, you don't have a right to damage his assets, either by burning down his house, nor proactively damaging him, or by you turning around to the authorities and trying to get them to go against him. Even though you're allowed to destroy his person, you're allowed to kill him, you're not allowed to destroy his financial assets. And the reason why is Shaharei Mamono Ro'ui Liyorsha. He says, because you have to keep in mind that his assets are supposed to be passed down to his heirs, and his heirs are innocent bystanders in all of this. And so you have to take that into account as well. Aval mutter ligram lo hefsid mamon, shekeven shegufa mufkar kol shekain mamono. But you are allowed to do a causative act that will cause his assets to be lost, because since his body, his physical person, is now sort of declared to be free game, then certainly his assets are as well. In other words, while you can't actively destroy his assets, because you have to be concerned about his heirs, but you can causatively destroy his assets. And we'll see with the commentary in a moment. And you certainly don't have to save his assets from ruin. If you see, let's say, something of his lost, you don't have to return his lost objects. But what you cannot do is, if you see an asset of his that is about to be lost, you cannot take it for yourself instead of just leaving it there, because that's something that really is not by rights yours. It's something that belongs to his heirs. And there are those who disagree, and they're more lenient to allow you to claim the assets of a Moser. And they say that a Moser has the same status as of a Mumar. A Mumar is a Jew who wantonly violates the Torah flagrantly, publicly, where there the Gemara says that you're allowed to just take all of his assets, strip him bare. V'imatza avedaso hi shalo, va'asr lahachzira lo, k'mosh asr lahachzir lanachri. He says, and therefore, if you find the lost object of a Moser, according to this latter opinion, you're allowed, you keep the lost object, and you're not even allowed to return it to the Moser, just like you're not allowed to return it to a heathen, because there's no longer any mitzvah of returning lost objects, because the Torah says it's only to your brother and not to someone who behaves in this way. And because there's a discrepancy in the opinions, there's one opinion that says that you're not allowed to take the assets of a Moser for yourself, and there's another opinion that says that you are. The best thing to do in that kind of scenario is just to leave it and not take it. But that's the idea, at least. So again, how much of this is academic and how much of this is practical? This is almost exclusively an academic discussion, because there's virtually no scenario in modern times where we could look at a situation and say that guy has a din of a moser, and you can take his assets and you can do with it whatever you want. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we appreciate that, we understand that this is mostly an academic discussion. Okay.
Unless, Rabbi, a Holocaust situation, God forbid, right? Or the capo, whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. If you're living in 70 years ago, 75 years ago, this was practical. You're right, Paul.
Yeah.
But thank God we don't live during the Holocaust. Yeah. Right. I guess it's good to know, just in case, God forbid, there would ever be another kind of, tragedy like that, tragic moment in history like that. I don't know. Okay.
Because unfortunately, probably 100 years ago, you might have been sitting here saying these things aren't going to happen, they're not applicable, and then they became applicable. God forbid they should ever again. But
yes. The point you're making is well noted. We cannot assume that we're going to be always in a forward trajectory in history. We may have to take some steps backwards before we can continue moving forwards. We have been moving forward, thank God, in our humanity ever since World War II, but it's conceivable that we will take steps backwards. It is conceivable. It would be tragic, but it's conceivable. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Asr lahargo, you're not allowed to kill a guy who's already done the damage, because there's no point in killing him at this point. Shaharei, and like the Imrei Yaakov speaks out, Shaharei ein harigaso elo mishum lahatzil chavero kimo berodef. He says the whole reason why sanction is given to kill a moser is because he's a rodef. He's trying to harm either you or another Jew. And if someone is a rodef, to stop them from committing the murder, you're allowed to kill them. The reason why a moser is liable for the death penalty is not because he's committed murder, right? Because if that were the case, number one, you'd have to take him to a beis din. Number two, he hasn't committed active murder. He's not the one who caused the guy, the victim, to be incarcerated or to die, right? He's just reported him to the authorities. And that's an act of grama. If that person were to be tried in beis din for murder, because through his act of Masira, he caused the fellow Jew to get killed by the authorities, he would not be found guilty and worthy of execution. It was not direct. He didn't pick up a weapon and kill the guy. He just used his mouth. So he's not a murderer. And certainly there was no edim, there's no hasra'ah. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says quite explicitly that if you sick a wild dog on someone, and as a result of your just sicking the dog on another person, that person gets killed, you're not liable for the death penalty. Below gara merodef the achar sha'avar avera the ein hargin also below hasro below beis din. He says, and certainly any kind of rodef who's already committed the act, you can't kill him, you can't execute him, even if he actively pursued another person and executed another person, because there was no hasra'ah, there was no forewarning, and there was no edim, and there's no beis din, right? So the kol shekain bisman hazeh, and that's certainly true nowadays, where beis din no longer is allowed to mete out capital punishment. V'chein hadin b'moser da'achar shemoser aser lahargo elim kein huchzak b'mesirus da'az chayshinan shemayimser orachim. And therefore, the only time that sanction is given to kill a moser is if you're worried that he's going to actually do this to other people, that he's already established a pattern that this is what he does, or he says, he publicly states that just as I was Moser on Yankel, who's now dead, I'm going to do the same thing for all you other Jews, right? And then, then sanction, of course, is given to Maser to execute that. Okay. Ela im kain huchzak b'mesiras kipamim, unless a pattern has already been established that this is what he does. He's done it already 3 times. Hai huchzak hainu shenoi dol rabim shuhu kain. So it's just that this pattern has been established that the public now knows that he's a professional moser. It's not that this has to be established in a court of law. The shekiblu edus b'fanav, and that it was done with witnesses. Shim kain ein lecha muchzak achshav shein lanu mumchin. He says, because if that were the case, then this halacha would not be practicable, because you don't have expert witnesses, you don't have expert judges. B'chol hanase an b'sanu merachim al elu nase achzar al doro. And what's interesting, this is stated by the Rashba, who lives in the 14th century. Apparently in his times, this law was still quite relevant in the 14th century, not surprisingly. He says anyone who is merciful upon a moser, right, and says, leave him alone, he's a fellow Jew, and he's a bleeding heart, right? So if you have too much compassion on a moser, you will eventually become cruel on your fellow man, because he who is merciful on someone who deserves to be punished will eventually be cruel to someone who doesn't deserve to be punished. And I forget, I forget the actual quote, but that's a statement by Chazal, that if you are overly merciful to the evil, you will eventually become overly cruel to the righteous. Okay. So if a person has already established a pattern, then he should be killed because he's going to do it again. The hargamoso biyadayim, and you're even allowed to do this actively to execute the guy. Umaisim b'chol yom be'arei ha'ma'arav laharog ha'mosrim shehuchzaku limsor mamon shel Yisrael. And he's now quoting the Rambam. The Rambam says that this is a regular occurrence in Western cities. Now, what does he mean by Western cities? It's not clear. For the Rambam, the West was Morocco, because the Rambam lived in Egypt. So it could be he's referring to other Islamic cities, or it could be he's referring to Europe. We don't really know. But what he says is that it is regularly done that Mosrim are executed when they inform on fellow Jews. The limsar hamosrim biyad ha'akum lahargum lahakosim kifi risheim, and also, even if you're not going to actively execute them, you should at least give them over to the authorities to prevent them from future damage. V'yesh omrim da'asur lahargo biyadayim rak mevakshim eitzav etachbula levar min ha'olam. He says there are other opinions, and here he's quoting the Ramah, who says that you're not allowed to actively kill him. You're not allowed to take a gun or a knife and just kill him. But the only thing you are permitted to do is to find a pretense to allow him to die. In other words, create a scenario where through entrapment and so forth, he will end up dying. The shalo bishas maisa, so that it's not that you're directly killing him, but you're doing a causative act which will cause his death. Ainu shaholech limsor da'az dino kirodef afal pi shehuchzak limsor. He says, because if he's not actively informing at this very moment, there's no sanction to go. You can't call him an active rodef right now. That would give you the right to kill him just when he's at rest at home. Okay, so therefore, this school of thought says you're allowed to arrange for his death, but you cannot kill him directly.
Rabbi, is that like the brothers with Yosef in the pit? I mean, it almost sounds like that, where they didn't.
Yeah, right. Right, you got it exactly right, Paul. Is that the example is lower him into a pit and leave him there. Or just like the brothers did to Yosef, is that, in other words, they weren't sure whether he had the din of a, according to some Meforshim, they viewed him as a rodef. He was trying to remove their spiritual life as patriarchal figures, because he was trying to usurp their role in Jewish history by making himself the fourth patriarch, and his brothers would be consigned to no longer be part of the Jewish people. They viewed that as an active effort to excommunicate them spiritually from the future of the Jewish people. They viewed him as a rodef, right? In that sense, that's not the conventional sense of a rodef. A rodef is someone who tries to actively, physically kill you. They saw this as a spiritual murder. That's what Yosef was trying to do, and therefore they said, "We're not going to actively kill him, but we'll lower him into a pit, and it'll be up to Hashem to decide what happens to him."
I guess they were informing to Yaakov about their misdeeds as well, right? So he was kind of an informant.
Well, yeah, but he was an informant, but there was no danger of physically of them dying.
I appreciate the rabbi's words about the spiritual death, the disassociation.
Right. So this is what the Gemara says, that there are times when a person does not deserve, and you're not permitted to take his life actively, but you are allowed to, let's say, throw him into a pit and see what happens. It's almost like, the villains in the old Batman show from the 60s. They would tie up Batman and leave him to be, put him on a machine that was going to lead him to a circular saw and cut him in half, but it was only going to be causative, right? Or tie the damsel in distress to the tracks and let the train kill her, right?
And of course, you had to wait till the following week to see what happened.
That's right. Same bad time, same bad channel, right?
Indeed.
So you'll have to wait and see what happens, right? So you're not allowed to actively kill him. Or another example would be is that, let's say a guy went down into a cistern. You could pull the ladder out so that he can't get out. So that would be the most that you'd be allowed to do according to the second opinion. You would also be allowed to attempt to cause his death via a Gentile. In other words, try to get him in trouble with a Gentile and tell someone in the mafia, hey, this guy needs to be knocked off, right? Because that's also like lowering him into a pit without you killing him direct. Okay, so the next part is the reason why you're not allowed, according to this, the first opinion that we saw in the Sif, the reason why you're not allowed to take his money from him, to destroy his assets or to take his assets, is because those are reserved for his heirs. There are times, as it says in the pasuk, that the wicked person will prepare assets so that his heirs, so that the righteous heirs of his can inherit them later on. But you are allowed to do a grama, you're allowed to do a causative act to cause him damage. Lo rak de grama de garmi, so sometimes it could even be a direct causative act, like sicking a dog on someone. But even according to the opinion that says that you're allowed to actively destroy his assets, you're not allowed to take his assets for yourself. Kain pasak hashach, he says this is the shach's psak, and then he says that the Ramah disagrees and says that you can even take his assets in order to make good, let's say, on the damage that he's caused, or either that or because his assets are hefker. We're not going to go into that now. Okay, and so we'll leave the Imrei Yaakov for here. So this is sort of like the most that I want to examine about this halacha. Again, it's just important to know that a person has to protect himself from a moser. If the only way to protect yourself from the moser is to use lethal force, then you are justified to do so. But there are many, many restrictions on that, especially if the damage has already been done. This person is not viewed as a murderer. This Moser does not deserve the death penalty. And even if he did, it would be usher for you to take the law into your own hands, because there was no hasra'ah, there was no forewarning, there were no two Eidim who testify in court, and there's no Beis Din to mete out the death penalty, because today we don't mete out the death penalty. You need a Sanhedrin that meets in the temple in order to mete out the death penalty. Okay, let's go on to the next halacha. Umi shehuchzak b'mesirus v'nira shein dvarav nishmaim rak machmas ashra. He says, let's say a person has been established as a moser, and the circumstances indicate that the only reason why his words are successful is because he's a man of financial means, he's a wealthy man, so he has standing within the Gentile society. So therefore, when he goes to the authorities and he greases enough palms, he gets his fellow Jews in trouble. So we can assess that it's only based on his wealth that he has this influence with the government. And so therefore, and therefore, if his assets were to be stripped, he would no longer have the same influence. So then it would certainly be permitted to destroy his assets or to give them over to a non-Jew, because in that way you'll save other people from future acts of Nesira from this dastardly guy. And the Imrei Yaakov just adds over here, he says, Kasav harama, Misha shalach shliach limsor, shliach uchzak lasov chayev hamishalcha. He says, if a person if Reuven dispatches Shimon to act as a moser, and Shimon acts as a moser based on the dispatch of Reuven, then the Reuven is the one who's chayev. Now, normally we say, Ve'ein lomar ein shliach l'dvar aveira, hol v'huchzak b'kach. He says, the reason why this is true, normally we say, ein shliach l'dvar aveira, that normally you can't say that a person is acting as a proxy to commit a sin, and the dispatcher is the one who's liable, because we normally say that the shaliach should consider to himself whether what he's doing is moral or correct or not, and he has free will. And so the shaliach is the one who's liable, not the dispatcher of the shaliach. But here, the Ramah feels that if a person regularly does acts of Nasira, and one time he does it via a shaliach, via proxy, he has the din of a moser and you can kill him, right? But that's the opinion of the Ramah. B'hashach polagalav d'spirle d'b'chol gavnei pater de'en shliach l'dvar aveira bein chiluk bein im hashaliach chuchzak olav. The Shach disagrees. He says that no, anytime a proxy acts in a sinful way, it's the proxy who's directly responsible, and it cannot be traced back to the dispatcher, even in a case of Nasira. Even when the Reuven, the guy who dispatched Shimon, has done this multiple times himself before, nonetheless, Shimon is solely responsible because it was up to him to decide whether he wanted to listen to Reuven's instructions or not. Okay. Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll hold it here for today. We're going to do one more halacha about Mesira, and then we're going to go on to other laws of damages, which will be causative damages where through different kinds of circumstances, and that'll be the next part of our discussion. But in the meantime, we'll just do one more halacha for tomorrow. Okay?
Sure, Rabbi. Thank you for changing your plans, Rabbi, to be able to meet on Monday.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm just going to daven at the 8:30 minyan. I hope that'll work out.
God willing, I'll see you there. Okay. Be well. Take care.